When Judge Jenkins began reading the inventory of my assets, it was the first time during the 3-hour hearing that I lifted my eyes to look at the man who had been my husband, my ex-husband, rather. Derek Rivers stood beside the defendant's table, looking less like the successful sales director he pretended to be and more like a pillar of salt. He appeared as though he'd been struck in the back of the head with something heavy and unexpected. His mouth hung slightly open, his eyes were wide and glazed, and beads of sweat dotted his receding hairline. A luxurious condominium of 880 square feet in a thriving downtown Atlanta neighborhood, Judge Jenkins, a woman in her mid-50s with the weary eyes of someone who'd witnessed too much domestic strife, read monotonously from the docket. A suburban home in Northwood, 1,290 square feet plus a 1-acre lot earmarked for agricultural tax relief. A commercial property on Peachtree Street, currently leased as a high-end boutique. "This is some kind of mistake. An absolute lie," shrieked my mother-in-law, Patricia Rivers, launching herself up from the public benches with the fury of a thwarted queen. Her face, usually powdered into an expression of genteel superiority, was now crimson. That pauper can't own anything. She never even had money for a decent new sweater. She's wearing the same dress from 3 years ago." The judge looked sternly over the rim of her reading glasses, a familiar silencing gesture. "I demand order in the courtroom, Mrs. Rivers. One more outburst and I will have the bailiff remove you immediately." Patricia noisily sank back into her seat, but her angry hisses were audible even from across the room, and her eyes drilled into me, trying to set me ablaze with contempt. I felt a strange, cold calmness settle over me. It was impossible not to remember that day 7 years ago when this very woman, Patricia, had met me at the grand oak door of her spacious inherited suburban home with open arms and the words, "Finally, my Derek found a decent girl. You're good stock, dear." She'd been assessing me then, my quiet demeanor, my sensible skirt, the small apartment my grandmother had left me. I was seen as safe, malleable, and decent. How drastically everything had changed since that calculated welcome. Derek and I had met at an exclusive physical therapy and wellness center near Sedona, Arizona. I was there seeking painful, grinding rehabilitation for an old back injury sustained in the car accident that had also tragically taken my fiancé's life 5 years prior. That accident had fractured more than my spine, it had shattered my world, leaving me closed off, burying myself in my stable but tedious job as an accountant at a county hospital. I lived alone in a modest 1-bedroom apartment, resigned to a life of quiet solitude. Derek, 38 and impeccably tailored, was there taking a mandated executive break after a stressful year as a sales director for a major construction firm. He looked the part of success. Tall, athletically built, with appealing if slightly guarded features, and a practiced, charming smile that could melt the professional distance I tried to maintain. I was 32 and deeply vulnerable. He burst into my life like a heat wave, not a spring breeze. He courted me lavishly and publicly, showering me with expensive compliments and bouquets of flowers that filled my small apartment with suffocating scent. 2 months after we returned to Atlanta, he proposed over a candlelit dinner, promising me a life of comfort and a normal, bustling family. I mistook his determination for love. We had a small, modest wedding. I didn't want a lavish celebration. It felt disrespectful to the past I was still healing from. His parents, however, quickly informed us that in these volatile times, it was better to invest the money in property, a decision I passively agreed to. Patricia was initially cool but strictly polite, the kind of politeness that felt like an ongoing evaluation. I tried to convince myself this was merely a mother's natural desire to test a new daughter-in-law. Peter, my father-in-law, was quieter, a gentler soul, though he clearly bowed to his wife's sharp will in every domestic matter. The first year of marriage was, by all appearances, genuinely happy. We rented a modern apartment near Derek's lucrative job, established our rhythm, and sketched out future plans. I kept my accounting job, and Derek's career kept advancing. We were the ideal, aspirational American couple, visiting Patricia and Peter on weekends for the hearty early dinners Patricia insisted on cooking. The veneer of happiness cracked the moment I became pregnant. At first, the joy was infectious, almost overwhelming. Patricia Rivers, the queen of emotional restraint, actually teared up. Finally, a grandchild. I feel it in my bones. It must be a boy. Derek's namesake. Derek himself was fussier than a mother hen, buying me every vitamin supplement on the market and signing me up for the most premium prenatal care at the most respected clinic in Atlanta. He wanted everything to be perfect. But during the second screening, Dr. Evans, a kind but clinical obstetrician, frowned slightly while hovering over the ultrasound monitor. "See this nuchal fold, Sarah?" She pointed to the shimmering, grainy image of our tiny, developing child. "It's thickened. There's a statistical possibility of a chromosomal anomaly. I'm going to refer you for additional specialized testing." The next 2 weeks were a dark, suffocating hell. Blood tests, uncomfortable CVS procedures, consultations with genetic counselors, and the endless, silent, sickening wait for definitive results. Derek, once overly solicitous, became quiet and physically distant, spending his evenings staring at the muted television screen. Patricia, at every meeting, didn't offer comfort, only lamented, "Lord, why are we being punished? There have never been any illnesses in our family. Is this some kind of judgment on us, Derek?" The final diagnosis landed on me like a death sentence. Down syndrome. "You understand, Sarah," the geneticist, a woman with kind, weary eyes, said softly, folding her hands on her desk. "The timeline allows for a medical termination. Should you choose that path, we need you to think carefully and speak with your husband about the profound impact raising a special needs child will have on your marriage and future." I didn't need to think. I didn't need to consult a spreadsheet or weigh pros and cons. A person was growing inside me, a child who already felt like the only light left in my life. The last ultrasound had confirmed it was a girl, my daughter. And even if she was born special, she would be mine. She was the one good thing to come out of the wreckage of the last 5 years. "I'm having the baby," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the sterile silence of the office. Derek, who had spent the consultation staring out the clinic window at the busy traffic below, remained silent, saying nothing at all. The real scandal erupted the moment we walked into his parents' immaculate living room that evening. Patricia Rivers screamed so loud the crystal chandelier above us seemed to rattle. "Are you absolutely out of your mind? Why would you bring that defective child into the world? You'll ruin your life, Derek's career, all of us. Get rid of it now before it's too late, Sarah." "Mom, please calm down," Derek tried to interject, but I could see the weakness in his eyes. He was already standing squarely on her side of the fence. "I can't do that," I replied, gripping the armrests of my chair, focusing on staying calm, on protecting the life inside me. "This is my child." "Your child?" My mother-in-law shrieked hysterically, clutching a hand to her chest. "It's going to be a burden, a vegetable that hangs around your neck for life. Do you realize what your life will become, and Derek's life? He wanted a normal family, normal kids, a clean slate." "Patricia, please lower your voice," Peter murmured, shrinking into his corner of the velvet sofa. "And don't you dare call me by my first name, you arrogant little fool." She pointed a shaking finger directly at me, violating every rule of her own carefully curated decorum. "You are no longer a welcome part of this family. Either you get rid of that freak, or you get out. Derek, tell her she has to choose." Derek never said anything coherent. He just drove me back to our rented apartment in the same stunned, self-pitying silence. That evening, as I lay in bed, the emotional turmoil preventing sleep, he sat on the edge of the mattress, not touching me. "Listen, Sarah," he whispered, the sound devoid of warmth. "Maybe Mom is right. Why do we need this kind of struggle? You're still young. We can try again later. Have a healthy baby, a normal one." I turned my head and saw it clearly in his eyes. Not sadness, not even true disappointment, but revulsion. He didn't see a person in me, nor a person in our daughter. We were just an inconvenient, expensive problem he wanted to dispose of cleanly, like a faulty business investment. "Leave," I said, and the single word was heavier than any shout. "Just go, Derek." I spent the remaining months of the pregnancy in a state of quiet, grim detachment. Derek formally stayed with me, sleeping in the guest room, but he lived his own life. He came home late, left early, and communicated in monosyllables. He stopped coming to doctor's appointments with me, claiming work was too demanding. Patricia called weekly with the same cruel query delivered in a fake, sickeningly sweet tone. "Well, have you come to your senses, Sarah? It's not too late to fix this mistake." I had not come to my senses. Maya was born on a cold, bright November morning. She was tiny, wrinkled, and unmistakably possessed the characteristic features of her syndrome. But when the nurse placed her warm, fragile body on my chest and she opened her eyes, so clear, so pure, so trusting, a profound, protective love, fierce as a forest fire, swept through me. I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the only right choice. Derek came to the hospital only on the third day. He stood by the bassinet, looked down at his sleeping daughter for perhaps 30 seconds, and simply muttered, "Well, now you're satisfied, aren't you?" He didn't touch her. He didn't approach me. He left without another word. Maya's first year was an endless, exhausting blur, a cycle of doctor visits, developmental assessments, and sessions with pediatric physical, occupational, and speech therapists. Children with Down syndrome require relentless, constant stimulation. I quit my accounting job. I couldn't bear to leave her with anyone, especially not Derek's family. He gave me money, yes, but reluctantly, always accompanied by a caustic jab. "How much more can you possibly spend on doctors? She'll never be normal anyway. Are you trying to bankrupt me?" Patricia completely refused to acknowledge her granddaughter's existence. My timid attempts to bring Maya to their spacious home were met with cold, vicious refusals. "Don't bring that creature here. It raises my blood pressure. This is punishment for your wicked stubbornness, Sarah." The isolation was crushing. My own parents had passed away years ago. My old close friends had been pushed away in the deep grief following the accident. Derek's family actively ignored me and the child. Derek himself began coming home drunk more and more often, or simply not coming home at all. When Maya turned 18 months old, the final sharp piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I walked into the hallway and saw Derek talking quietly on the phone, his back to the living room window. He hadn't heard my footsteps. "Of course I love you," he was saying softly, his voice full of the charming warmth he no longer used with me. "It's just a difficult situation right now. A technicality. Yes, I understand you want a baby, and I want a normal, healthy baby. Not," he paused, chuckling softly, chillingly. "We'll start trying as soon as I sort out this situation and get the papers filed." I quietly closed the door. Something inside me snapped completely, but the breaking was silent. There wasn't even anger left, just a cold, focused emptiness and a strange, overwhelming relief. Now at least everything was honest, brutal, and entirely out in the open. The debt of love was paid in full. Now it was time for justice. The next day, after Derek left for his important job, I sat down at the computer. It was the first time since Maya's birth that I searched for something for myself, not for rehabilitation information. It started accidentally, a small flicker of opportunity in the vast darkness. In one of the online support groups for mothers of special needs children, someone posted a vague ad, "Consultant needed for developing new educational materials for children with Down syndrome. Pay $300. I responded instantly, without much hope. 3 days later, a small publishing house in New York called. They were launching a desperately needed line of specialized literature and were seeking expert parents who could speak to the actual needs of these children. I consulted with them in meticulous detail, speaking methodically and with deep expertise drawn from 18 months of non-stop, desperate self-education. They paid me the promised money, but more crucially, they offered me steady ongoing collaboration on a retainer. That small retainer was the seed of my new life. Derek didn't notice a thing. In his self-obsessed world, I was still the discarded stay-at-home mother, hopelessly confined to the apartment with a defective child. I hid the small consulting checks, opening a bank account in my maiden name, Sarah Thompson. In the first few months, I was making $400 to $600 consulting, helping craft educational programs, and quietly writing articles for specialized parent portals under a pseudonym. The major breakthrough, the true turning point, happened when I met Tiffany Hayes, the mother of a boy with severe autism, in an online advocacy forum. Tiffany, a former product designer, complained bitterly that she couldn't find quality developmental tools that were affordable, durable, and specifically designed for non-neurotypical learning patterns. "You know what?" I typed back to her one late night, driven by a surge of entrepreneurial adrenaline. "Let's stop complaining and let's make them ourselves. I'll handle the curriculum and the money. You handle the design and production logistics." A week later, we registered a small LLC in the state of Georgia, Empower Play Educational Aids. Tiffany had a connection with a small struggling workshop owner near Marietta, and she handled the production and logistics. I handled the core development and, crucially, the marketing. Using the organic, desperate demand of the parent groups I was already part of, we sold the first batch of 100 specialized developmental card sets in 2 weeks. The second batch, 200 sets, sold out in a single week. By the end of the first year, we had launched a full-scale online store, and Tiffany and I were each netting $4,000 to $6,000 a month. Derek remained completely oblivious. He had long since ceased caring what I did inside the walls of the apartment. His mistress, Olivia, as I learned from an intentionally overheard conversation, was a young, sleek administrator at a fitness club 10 years my junior, actively dreaming of a white wedding. Patricia occasionally called, no longer to plead, but to deliver fresh venom. I hear Derek found a normal woman, young and pretty, and they want children. Normal children. You understand. You ruined his life with your stubbornness, you miserable fool. I listened silently to her cruelties, then hung up and went back to my spreadsheets. I didn't have time for her noise. I was quietly, methodically building a fortress for my daughter and me. Maya grew. Her development was slower than typical children, a constant uphill climb, but she was making incredible progress. She started walking at 2 years old and speaking individual words at 3. She was the most affectionate, expressive, and smiling girl. When I brought her to the specialists at the developmental center, everyone admired her tenacious progress and radiant personality. Derek's neglect became absolute. He could go weeks without even seeing his daughter, even though we shared the same rented roof. I knew the marriage was a destructive pretense, but I wasn't ready to strike yet. I needed 2 things: time to grow the business and financial leverage. By the time Maya turned 3, I could easily afford true independence. Empower Play was booming. Tiffany and I had expanded our product line to include custom sensory bins and adaptive reading tools, hired 3 part-time employees, and opened representation in 3 states. My personal hidden income had stabilized at over $10,000 a month. I made my first major move, a deliberate act of financial independence. I bought the condo, 880 square feet of sunlit freedom in my own name, using a down payment from my business account, then paid off the remainder over 8 months. It was in a family-friendly, thriving downtown neighborhood with a dedicated playground, and critically, it was within walking distance of the Developmental Services Center. Derek, who only glanced at the joint account balance, never noticed the movement of funds from my separate, secret bank. Then came the suburban house 50 miles outside the city, a place for respite. It was a bargain needing extensive cosmetic work, but the 1-acre lot was perfect for the vegetable garden I dreamed of tending with Maya. I filed the deed under my legal name, Sarah Thompson. My final investment was the small commercial space downtown, the property on Peachtree Street. I took out a small short-term commercial loan and paid it off in 5 months using my retained business profits. Renting it out as a boutique shop generated a stable $800 a month, which I immediately put into Maya's trust fund. In 4 years, while Derek entertained his mistress, publicly mourning the normal family he could never have, I had transformed myself from a discarded, financially helpless housewife into a formidable businesswoman with a net worth exceeding $1,350,000. I was ready. And now, in this stuffy Atlanta courtroom, where my special needs child had been so viciously called a little leech, where my mother-in-law was hissing curses across the room, and where the man I had married was demanding to be left with something from the marital estate, they were finally learning the truth. The total value of the respondent's assets, the judge looked up from the documents, her face utterly expressionless, is confirmed at $1,350,000. Derek grasped the edge of the defense table, the wood creaking slightly. He was white as the linen collar of his expensive shirt. I met his gaze, the first real, focused eye contact we'd had in a year, and smiled for the first time during the entire hearing. It was a cold, satisfying smile of absolute victory. This is impossible," Derek stammered, looking at me as if I were a stranger who had stolen his identity. "Where did you get that? You weren't working. You had no income." "The plaintiff suggests the respondent was not working," Judge Jenkins stated, looking over her glasses, the hint of disdain in her voice barely suppressed. "I have documents here confirming that Ms. Rivers is a 50% co-owner of a successful multi-state developmental aids company, engages in specialized consulting work, and has a stable, verifiable income averaging $10,000 monthly over the past year. All income is official, taxes are paid, and the documents are impeccably in order. Furthermore, Your Honor," Michael Carver continued, his voice heavy with finality, "I have witnessed statements from neighbors and friends confirming that for the last 2 years, the plaintiff has not actually resided at the registered marital address but has been living exclusively with his, girlfriend. We also have indisputable evidence that the plaintiff systematically evaded participating in the child's upbringing, refused to take his daughter to doctors, and showed absolutely no interest in her health, development, or education." "That's a lie." "I was just working a lot." Derek jumped up, red in the face. "Working for the family, for our future." "Which family, Derek?" I finally spoke, leaning forward, my voice surprisingly calm and clear, a clean, sharp sound in the stuffy courtroom air. "The one where you called your daughter defective and a vegetable? Or the one you were planning to build with your mistress, Olivia?" He froze, his mouth agape. "I have recordings, Derek." I nodded to my attorney, who produced a voice recorder that looked ridiculously small and innocuous. "I started recording our conversations 6 months ago when I realized divorce wasn't enough. I needed protection." Michael Carver pressed the button, and the courtroom was instantly filled with Derek's voice, raw and pathetic. "I'm tired of all of this, Olivia. I'm tired of living with that freak. I want a normal family, you understand? Normal kids. And Sarah is a stubborn fool who ruined my life. We should have gotten rid of it right away when the doctors told us." Patricia was deathly pale. Derek clutched his head, his world visibly collapsing around him. That's not what I meant," he mumbled, his voice trailing off. "And here's another recording, Your Honor." The attorney switched tracks instantly. The next voice was Patricia's, vicious and triumphant, talking to her son 3 months ago. "Finally, you're divorcing her. Take the house, Derek. She's a nobody. She has nowhere to go with her brat. Let her move out wherever she wants, and you can live normally with your Olivia. She'll give you healthy, handsome children, unlike that one." Silence hung in the air, thick and poisoned. Judge Jenkins looked at Patricia with open, undisguised disgust, as if she were inspecting something rotten. I didn't mean that," my mother-in-law stammered, looking around frantically for an escape. "I was just worried about my son's future." "Enough." The judge raised a weary but firm hand. We move on to the division of assets. Derek's lawyer, a young man with a cocky, arrogant look who clearly hadn't done his due diligence, sputtered about jointly acquired property, arguing that the wife couldn't have engaged in a successful business if the plaintiff hadn't provided the essential structure of a family. Michael Carver calmly, surgically dismantled every argument. The condo was purchased with my client's personal money in her name. I have the entire documented financial history. The house is the same. The commercial property is the same. The business is registered to my client and a partner. Derek Rivers has no legal, equitable, or moral claim to any of it. But we were married for 4 years. Derek started to scream, desperation overcoming his caution. Everything acquired during the marriage is shared. Not everything, Mr. Rivers, the judge patiently explained, leaning into the microphone. Section 34 of the Family Code stipulates that property acquired by one spouse through a gratuitous transaction or as a direct result of individual business activity is his or her personal property. Your wife created the business independently without using your capital. All documents confirm this fact. I demand compensation, Derek shouted, slamming his fist on the table. I supported her while she stayed at home. That's also a contribution to the marriage. You supported the family by fulfilling your minimal duty as a husband and father, my attorney cut in, his voice steely. And you did so poorly. My client, in contrast, not only provided for herself and the child independently, but also contributed significantly more to the household expenses than you. Here is the proof. He pulled out another pristine file. Here are the receipts for the rent of the apartment for the last 3 years. Payment was made from my client's personal business account. Here are checks for groceries, children's clothes, medication, and developmental sessions, all from her separate personal funds. The picture, Your Honor, is quite clear. You were formally married, but for the last 3 years, each of you was effectively living on your own income, with the crucial difference that my client spent hers solely on the child and the household, while the plaintiff spent his exclusively on his personal life. I had collected every single receipt, every bank statement, every canceled check for 2 years, knowing this day would come. I scanned them, saved them in a dedicated encrypted folder, and backed them up to the cloud, ready for the reckoning. We moved to the question of the child's residence, the judge said, shuffling documents that looked heavy with bureaucratic weight. The plaintiff requests that the minor, Maya Rivers, reside with the mother. The respondent does not object. I do not object, I confirmed quietly. Wait, I object now. Derek unexpectedly cut in, his voice cracking. He was scrambling now, seeing his financial future evaporate. Everyone, including his own mother, stared at him. Derek, what are you? Patricia whispered. Shut up, Mom. He shook his head violently. I want the child to stay with me. I'm her father. May I inquire about the sudden reason for this decision? Michael Carver asked, his tone glacial. Considering the plaintiff's absolute lack of involvement in the child's upbringing over the last 4 years. I'm her father. Derek nervously licked his lips. I have the right. And besides, the mother doesn't have proper living conditions. She lives in a rented apartment. My client has her own condo of 880 square feet, purchased in cash, the attorney reminded him dryly, as well as a suburban home. Her living conditions are more than adequate and demonstrably better than the plaintiff's current situation. But she works. She works too much now. Who will watch the child? Derek was grasping wildly at straws. My mom can help. The same mother who, according to sworn testimony and recording evidence, called your daughter a brat and a freak, and refused to see her for all 4 years of her life? The judge looked through the papers, her expression hardening. Do you truly believe that is a suitable candidate for primary child care? Patricia winced, finally silenced. Furthermore, the judge continued, according to the Department of Family and Children's Services report, the mother's living conditions fully meet all requirements. The condo has a dedicated children's room and every necessary adaptive tool for a child with special needs. The mother systematically takes the child to every doctor and specialist and is actively and demonstrably engaged in her development. You, Derek Rivers, according to that very same report, have not visited your daughter at home once in the last year. I was working, Derek weakly tried to justify himself. Working or living with your mistress, the judge countered. I have testimony from 3 separate witnesses confirming you were residing at a different address for 14 months. She took off her glasses and wearily rubbed the bridge of her nose. You know, Mr. Rivers, in 20 years on the bench, I've seen many cases of contested custody. But do you genuinely want to keep the child, or is this simply a cynical last-ditch attempt to evade mandatory child support payments? Derek was silent, his face now a furious, mottled red. I ask the court to consider, Michael Carver stood up, delivering the coup de grace, that the plaintiff systematically spoke about the child in a profoundly humiliating way. We have recordings and witnesses ready to confirm that he used offensive words to describe his own daughter, was ashamed of her existence, and refused to go out with her or take her to the clinic. Transferring the child to such a parent would cause serious, irreparable harm to her psychological health. But she doesn't understand anything. Derek burst out, reverting to his old cruel defense. She has Down syndrome. Intellectual disability does not equate to a lack of emotions, Mr. Rivers. The judge cut him off sharply. Children with Down syndrome are perfectly capable of sensing how others feel about them, especially a parent's rejection. And judging by the report from the clinical psychologist who observes your daughter, the girl actively recoils from you and experiences significant distress in your presence. I remembered the day the rehabilitation center psychologist delicately asked me if everything was okay at home. Maya, who was usually affectionate and trusting with every stranger, would visibly shrink back and hide behind my legs whenever Derek was around. Children know. They always know the difference between acceptance and rejection. The court rules, the judge began to read the final decision, her voice now firm and resounding, that the residence of the minor, Maya Rivers, shall be determined with the mother, Sarah Rivers Thompson. The father is granted the right to visitation every second and fourth Saturday of the month from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., in the presence of the mother or a person authorized by her, at a neutral supervised location. In the presence of the mother? Supervised. Derek was outraged, sputtering with disbelief. I can't even be alone with my own child? Given your stated position and demonstrated attitude toward the child over the last 4 years, the court deemed supervision necessary for the child's emotional safety, the judge sliced through his protest. If you prove you've fundamentally changed, it can be reconsidered. But for now, this is the arrangement. Regarding child support, she continued, considering the plaintiff's official income of $7,500 monthly, the court rules to collect child support at the rate of 25% of all types of income, which amounts to $1,875 per month. What? That's highway robbery. Derek jumped up again. I have loans. I have obligations. I won't pay that. That is the standard state-mandated rate for one child, the judge replied calmly. You may appeal, but considering that your daughter requires additional expensive medical care, specialist sessions, and lifelong rehabilitation, the amount is more than fair and necessary. But she has tons of money herself, Derek shouted, pointing a furious finger across the room at me. Why does she need my child support? It's a punitive measure. Child support is the parent's obligation to support the child, the judge patiently explained. Regardless of the other parent's financial situation, you do not get to unilaterally renounce your responsibility, Mr. Rivers. A long, heavy silence descended. Exactly. The judge nodded slowly. Furthermore, the court rules to collect court costs from the plaintiff, payable to the respondent in the amount of $3,000, as well as an award of compensation for emotional distress. What emotional distress? Patricia wailed, finally recovering her voice. For the systematic insults, financial negligence, and humiliation the respondent was subjected to by the plaintiff and his mother, The judge looked at Patricia coldly. We have recordings, witness testimony, and messaging transcripts presented as evidence. The compensation amount is $4,500. Derek sank onto his chair, utterly defeated, his face ashen. Patricia dissolved into full-blown hysterics, and Peter frantically tried to calm his wife, looking utterly lost in the ruins of their carefully constructed pride. I sat there watching the scene unfold, completely detached. It was perfect, cold revenge. These people had tormented me and my vulnerable daughter for 4 long years, using every tool of contempt and cruelty to make me feel worthless. And all that time, I was quietly building my strength, constructing a self-sufficient future where their judgment held no power. The session is concluded. The judge banged her gavel. The decision takes effect in 30 days. During this time, the parties may file an appeal. She stood and walked out, her weary posture somehow radiating justice. I got up to leave, gathering my purse and files. Derek blocked my path to the swinging doors. Wait, Sarah, we need to talk. Alone. About what, Derek? I looked at him calmly, the sight of his desperate, haggard face giving me no pleasure, only profound indifference.